Let's look at this further with Chris Oxtoby. He's the researcher at UCT's Democratic Governance and Rights Unit. Chris, thank you so much for your time. I wonder, what is your reaction to the appointment of Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo to the position of Chief Justice?
Well, first reaction is that it's great news that we finally have the appointment being made. It was really important that we did have a permanent Chief Justice again after such a long time without one, because there's a lot that needs doing in the judiciary. As to the choice of Justice Zondo himself, I think it's a safe choice, perhaps. He's been the Deputy Chief Justice for nearly 5 years, so he's someone who's been within the system, someone who knows how it works. It's not a very sort of radical or left field choice, but maybe that's a good thing for the judiciary. And of course, as you've mentioned, the path does seem to be set for Justice Mandisa Maya to perhaps become the next Chief Justice in just over 2 years when Justice Zondo's tenure runs out.
But that's not guaranteed, though, because we've seen Justice Moseneke not rising to the position of Chief Justice. But I wonder, some say that the president missed an opportunity to appoint a woman to the position of Chief Justice. But, I mean, one of the things that now some are saying is that, but the fact that she's going to be deputy, as you alluded to as well, is more than enough. But others still say that he missed an opportunity. I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
I think it's undeniable that it is a missed opportunity. We've never yet had a female Chief Justice. Even as and when she is appointed Deputy Chief Justice, Justice Maya will still make history. But I'm sure for many people they will say that, look, just ascending to the deputy position is not really enough. If we're really serious about taking gender transformation forward to the fullest extent, then we need to see a woman in the very top position. So I think to an extent it's definitely true that it was an opportunity missed, but that opportunity is not necessarily missed forever. I think it does certainly look like the president has set a path to look at her as being the next Chief Justice after Justice Zondo. But as you say, that's not guaranteed. It's not a formal requirement. So I would say, yes, it is difficult to argue against the suggestion that was an opportunity missed.
And of course, the prerogative always lies with the president. And we saw him telling journalists that he was surprised that the JSC had gone so far as to recommend its preferred candidate. It was expected to just hold interviews, according to him, and then just let the final word be his. Others are saying that the JSC was not even supposed to do this to begin with, and they're supporting what the president says. Did the JSC overstep its mandate?
Well, I actually have a little bit of sympathy for the JSC in this case, because the process was so different to what's happened previously with the appointment of the Chief Justice. We were in uncharted territory, and it wasn't entirely clear before the JSC started interviewing the candidates what exactly was going to happen. And I think that's certainly an area in this process to be fixed going forward. I think why people are so find what the JSC did so problematic is maybe not so much with them recommending a preferred candidate, but with them doing so after the interviews that happened were so uneven and candidates were treated so differently in those interviews. I think that then makes, after those interviews, nominating one candidate looks like a partisan choice and looks problematic. But just in terms of whether it was appropriate to put one name forward or just to comment on all of the names, I do have some sympathy with the JSC because they were in uncharted territory. But of course, as you say, and as everyone pointed out, legally, in terms of the Constitution, the final choice remained with the president, and that indeed is the case, as he's shown by exercising his prerogative to make a different appointment to the one the JSC recommended.
I'll get to the JSC and how, they also came under criticism, as you alluded to, in just a moment. But I wonder, given what you're saying tonight and what we've also seen as some of the reaction then to the president deciding to appoint Justice Zondo and others saying that he needs to explain the reasoning behind not appointing Justice Mandisa Maya as the Chief Justice, do you think he owes the country an explanation, despite the fact that this is entirely his prerogative and he's able to choose whomever he wants?
On principle, I would always like to have as many reasons as possible given for any judicial appointment, particularly one as senior as this. I mean, one can speculate about what some of the factors might be, but it's not certain which one of those weighed most heavily on the president. I think it would be useful to have some sense of what the guiding factors were. Was it a case that he thought that continuity in leadership was important, and that Justice Zondo should therefore take over, having been the Deputy Chief Justice for a while? Was it some other factor? Was it something particular in Justice Zondo's record? I personally would like to know that, but I'm sure the counter from the president's side will be that yes, it is the prerogative to make that choice. But I think, bearing in mind some of the comments and the criticism about that, I think the more information we have about what went into making that decision, the better.
And her appointment, once it happens to the Deputy Chief Justice position, will leave a vacancy in the Supreme Court, meaning we might also see some interviews there as well. Is it possibly time to tighten the criteria that the JSC use when you look at, like you were saying, the unevenness, as you call it, of some of the questioning, as well as, in some instances, how the conduct should be? So do you think maybe, given the interviews we might see, it might be time to talk about the criteria?
I absolutely do. I think it's really important, and I think it's something that should be right at the top of Justice Zondo's to-do list now that he's been appointed to the position. I think that there have been a lot of problems in the JSC and in terms of how they've conducted their interviews for some time. If one recalls last year in April, when interviews for the Constitutional Court happened, that was so problematic that the JSC was challenged in court and in fact had to concede that litigation and do the interviews all over again. So there is a long and problematic history of those interviews not running as well as they should do. And I think in my view, a lot of that does come down to the fact that there need to be more detailed and more carefully considered criteria for the JSC to apply, because that's foundational to so much else of what they do. There has been mention at the end of the last round of interviews that the JSC was going to look at that and was going to consider discussing it prior to the April interviews. And one can only hope that that does indeed happen with all speed.
And very briefly, Chris, we're almost out of time. What would you say the new Chief Justice's priority areas should be?
Well, as I say, I really hope that reform in the JSC and in the appointments process itself is right up there. I would also say the process of dealing with complaints against judges, that's well known that there have been serious problems with delays in many high-profile cases. I think that's something that needs reforming. And I think the general modernization of the court system and how cases are managed, how cases are filed. There's a slow rollout of some electronic and online systems in some courts, but I think a lot more needs to happen there. I think those are all key priority areas that will hopefully be receiving a lot of attention now that we do have a permanent Chief Justice in place.
One can certainly hope. The modernization issue is quite a big one, Chris, and I do hope that, of course, as you say, it becomes one of the key priority areas, because we saw it even becoming a huge issue in those JSC interviews. Thank you so much for your time. That was Chris Oxtoby. He's a researcher at UCity's Democratic Governance and Rights Unit.